So perhaps I just explain that I work for the Prague Civil Society Center, Pražský Graždanský Center, and we are a new outlet to empower and support civil society, not only in Russia, but in all post-Soviet countries. And we try to really work with innovative approaches, and we try to have a deeper understanding of the trends of civic activism in the whole world, and especially in this region. Well, my theme today is the new civics in English, yes. And after that, we will hear the real civics. And in fact, yesterday already, I think with Marina, Anna, and Elena Pamfilova, we already had a very real insight into civic activism yesterday. Why the new civics? Well, my understanding is that the real civics, in most cases today, are new civics. And I think we just need to look back to the times of Bolotnaya, just 7 years ago, to understand how much has changed. I, this summer, really rubbed my eyes when I looked at how things were happening at the protests in Moscow. We had people chatting with each other on the new GeoChats on Telegram. We have a white counter giving us an exact number of protesters, 25,000 in Moscow this weekend on Sunday. We had special chat rooms telling people exactly which street to use and which one to avoid. And we had, after the protests, there were chat rooms to offer medical aid, legal aid, logistical aid, packages to be sent to the detention centers. And there was even, by ODV Info, a police taxi chat where you could say you have been released and a car would come and pick you up, which I still find amazing. There are many new things. We also didn't have pro-Kremlin rappers in 7 years ago, and today we have them, but we also have them to take down their videos because they get so many dislikes that it's better that the video disappears from YouTube. To me, in a way, the most astonishing thing has been this open letter by almost 200 Orthodox priests protesting against a Kremlin clampdown on protesters and asking for the release of protesters. We have never seen this, and in fact, I never imagined I would see this. For me, in a way, even these priests, together with all the professional groups that we discussed yesterday, the journalists, the actors, the students, even the doctors, all these groups that came out as groups, to me, they are the new civics because they have put their values, the values we discussed yesterday, in the first place and have spoken out about them. So, to me, it's two things. It's the use of new tools and instruments, a new infrastructure that has developed, technologically based, and it's a new solidarity, really, between different civic groups that has emerged, which is both striking and new. I think it is important to say that these developments in Russia are part of a much wider global trend in civil society. Just as rising authoritarianism has been a worldwide phenomenon, civil society's response to it has also been very far-reaching and is increasingly global. It is led by important international organizations that I want you to be aware of. One is the International Civicus Association. There is the International Network of Civil Liberties. There is the International Center for Non-Profit Law, the Human Rights Law Network. There is also OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Reporting reporting project, which you might have heard of. All these are international organizations that are providing new networks. I think it's a whole landscape of new trainings, of new research, of conferences, of advocacies, groups, of new formats and projects that has sprung up and become and really shown a new effect, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. In some Russian organizations and individuals are members. I know that Agora, for instance, is a member of NCLO, the International Network of Civil Liberties. But in general, I see that Russia and all the neighboring countries of the region are still very underrepresented on the international level. Just a few days ago, I was in Hamburg at the Global Investigative Journalism Conference. There were, I mean, this group is big, but there were 1,800 participants, which just shows in what a world we live. Investigative journalism is having such a development. But there were just 2 Russians, 2 very important Russians, Ivan Golunov and Roman Dobrokhotov. But they were the only people from Russia. There were 2 people from Azerbaijan, both of them in exile. There was 1 from Armenia and 3 from Kyrgyzstan. That's all. You know, it is among 1,800 people, there has to be a bigger representation of the experience of your region. And at my Prague Center, we do everything we can to connect Russian activists with neighboring colleagues from countries that are going through same experiences, and also to the international context, where your voices have a lot to bring and where you can learn a lot of what's going on in a very similar, or interestingly enough, also in a very different way in other countries. So I think what has happened is that this connectivity has been interrupted. It was always the DNA of civil society to be connected. And over the past 10 years, the authoritarian regimes have tipped the pyramid, and they are now cooperating and coordinating things amongst each other, very much also through the security services. They are extraditing people and comparing their methods and sharing them. But civil society in many countries has become isolated in their own society, with their neighboring countries, and in the international context. And I think things are changing now very much. And to understand these trends, I think, is very interesting, because it puts everyone in a bigger perspective. So to me, it's important to understand, first of all, it's not just Russia where it's happening. It's the entire neighborhood that is shifting, because there is a real wave of exciting new activism spreading all over the countries that were formerly the Soviet Union. It was always a bit of Ukraine and Georgia, but now it is all over the place. And the first and most important country, I think, is Armenia, that has had a quiet velvet revolution, like we are celebrating now in 89, 30 years ago in Czechoslovakia. And it's continuing now with this movement Ecofront, which is protesting very heavily against this gold mining project. So there's a new, almost a year later already, the new wave of activism, which is not pro-regime, but asking for a new policy of the new regime. In Kazakhstan, I know there are some ladies here from Kazakhstan who know much better than me. We have not only had a regime change that everybody understood had an echo somewhere also for Russia, but we are having a very strong new political movement called Ayan Kazakhstan. I hope I pronounce it right. It's called Wake Up Kazakhstan. And last weekend, as there were people in Moscow, there was protests against rising Chinese influence in Kazakhstan. And you just need to follow on Telegram a Russian language channel, which is called Protesty v Mirie, to understand how everything is happening all over the place. We've had big protests in Moldova, also leading to a big change in that country. And the list goes on. Because I think if the Kremlin looks also at Uzbekistan, after the death of President Karimov, and the changes and slow opening that is happening there, and at Kyrgyzstan, where the Kremlin's loyal ally Atambayev is now sitting behind bars and waiting for a trial on murder and hostage-taking charges, I think they are worried, because at this point they just have Belarus, Azerbaijan, and lovely Turkmenistan, where things still are as the Kremlin likes it. Nice dictatorships in full control of social developments and able to suppress protests. It's the landscape has really changed to just a few years ago. And even looking abroad, I think the Kremlin can take very little comfort, because Hong Kong, Venezuela, even now Turkey again and Egypt show that authoritarians are not having the last word of the day. And we had the climate protection protests across the whole world, across the full range of time zones, also in Armenia, by the way, very strong. And so I am not surprised that this year the Economist journal's Democracy Index, for the first time in 10 years, showed that the decline of democracy and civic freedoms came to a halt. It is only a halt, perhaps just a pause, but it is saying something. For civic activism, it's a big sign of hope that we might have reached the deep end of this rising authoritarianism. So it's not just Russia, but it's also not just protests. Because this new civic shift that we are analyzing every day is not just about people out in the streets and coordinating better amongst each other. We see a deeper change, a new energy, a new self-belief, and a new creativity in the whole sector. And this energy and new tools on the technological side, they are being used to offer citizens real solutions to real problems, which I think is very important, as it becomes increasingly clear that authoritarian regimes are not able or even willing to address any of the real problems that people have. There is a whole universe of new applications and other tools that really cater to needs and issues that people care about. In Kazakhstan, we are promoting a new application where every citizen can measure the level of air pollution in the city. There are new tools for fact-checking, for crowdfunding. We heard yesterday also about domestic violence, Then there is tools to check illegal construction, helping disabled people get on buses, a big project in Yerevan, that people can actually, find a bus that is able to take them when they are in a wheelchair. And there are wonderful projects also in civic education, Lena, which are going into a new era with online projects that reach people who otherwise would never have attended a seminar like this. The real success story, I think, are online games. We supported a game set up by Team 29 in St. Petersburg, Gebnia, which you might know about, which is a great success. And it's teaching people how to communicate with police and security services when they knock at the door. And it has been downloaded 70,000 times by now, which says, it's reaching a lot of people. And only last week, the Good Old Soldiers' Mothers Committee, which we all know from the early days of the 1990s, also went into gamification. And they are offering an online game now, which takes people step by step on what to do if they want to pursue alternative military service, civic military service, and gives them very, very good advice. It's like a handbook online. There's also Takia Dila, which has done something else, namely an interactive film on HIV, which is called Vsiosložna, and it is amazingly interesting because you step into a film and answer questions and take your own decisions and understand a lot about what it means to be HIV positive in Russia. I think they reach more people than any NGO, and we had many of them until they were all called foreign agents and had to close down, could ever have done. In Kazakhstan, there's a very interesting project because they have a very high rate of of suicides among young people. And there's an interactive game which parents can use to train a more modern and more emphatic dialogue with young people and their children. And it is being used a lot by people already. In Belarus, digital activists have built a new website which helps people navigate a very complicated and controversial new pension law. And this has been such a success that the legislation, which really had many problems, was ultimately adapted in a new reading in the parliament. So it had a very positive effect in the country. So for me, all this is far more than protests, is responsible citizenship and working for public welfare, which is exactly what I think the main title of this whole seminar is all about. And it is Sistemnaya rabota, as Yelena said yesterday. It's working much deeper than just being out, or I'm not saying just being out in the street, but it's more systemic. So it's not just protests, but it's also not just civil society. Because today's activism, also in Russia, no longer relies mainly on traditional registered NGOs. This is what we helped build and developed in the 1990s. But today, this whole wave of repression and defamation and lack of funding has reshaped the sector, not only in Russia, but really everywhere. It has made the world of civic activity much more diffuse, but also more diverse than ever. Many old NGOs, like Lena's School, have reinvented themselves. You know, they have renamed themselves, they have reorganized themselves, they have resettled abroad and have showed a fantastic resilience. But at the same time, many others have not even registered as NGOs anymore. They are just informal movements, and they take totally new forms to fulfill what yesterday was called their missions and visions. It's a new approach outside of legal structures. And these groups are very interesting because they are much more fluid, and they connect different social groups more easily than a registered NGO ever could. And I think where we see this most is in ecological protests against the landfills, and especially against these garbage places, because there you have united segments of society that were normally not even talking to each other and not ever acting together. And we have helped to produce a beautiful new film, which I must try and send somehow via Lena to you, called Trava. And it is a cross-section of all the ecological movements in Russia. And there you see that it's really everyone out there in many regions of the country. It is traditional activists of Ecovachta and so on, but it is also concerned young parents. It's old babushkas sitting in tents in the forests. And it is also even Cossack groups that are defending, rivers and lakes and forests of the country. And I still remember interviewing the Vasily Moskovets, who was leading the campaign against the Tomino plant in Chelyabinsk, who said, ultimately people realize they breathe the same air, they drink the same water. So ecology, more than anything, unites people and understand that they have a common issue. I think there are other issues as well, apart from ecology. I think it is music, art, and urbanism, which is also building completely new networks and connecting people that were not connected before. We have invited to Prague also the Azeri rapper, Yamal Ali, who is a celebrity in his country. And his songs, you know, are all about injustice and suppression and violence in his country. And he is a singer, but he is a human rights defender at the same time. In Kyrgyzstan, there's a new star called Zere, who is a 20-year-old girl, and she did the first ever feminist song with a very provocative video. But she is, through her music, reaching people that you know, are waking up, and there's a really new debate about female feminism, female values, protection of female rights in Kyrgyzstan, which she, as a 20-year-old, has helped to spark. And our most favorite team is a little group of 18 to 20-year-old girls, also in Bishkek, who are building the first microsatellite. They are all interested in science and physics, and they are going to take about 8 years or so until the thing flies, but they are an all-female group building a satellite, and Kyrgyzstan has never had anything in space. And the people who have set up this project, who are all men, say you can do nothing better than to create a new Uvazhenie, you know, for women in our country, than if it's young girls taking us into space. So for me, this is new civics, yeah? So it's not just Russia, it's not just protests, it's not just classical civil society. And if you give me some more time, I would like to go a little bit deeper to understand what makes it all new. I think the first point really is the new infrastructure. We call it civic tech. It's really all the new tools that are available. It took some time to arrive in Russia and the region. There was a certain atstalos, but now it has come with a new speed and a new dynamics, which is great. And it's not just all the new apps and games and the art of making good caption videos or podcasts and film formats. It's not just all of this. I think what contributes to empower this new ecosystem, as I would call it, is that civil society and media and information are merging into one more and more day by day. Because if you look at OVD Info, Takia Dila, Team 29, Siem na Siem, I somehow assume that you know all of them really, or my favorite, Mediazona. Are they NGOs or are they media outlets? I think it is more and more hard to tell what they are. In fact, they are both. They are NGOs using information as for their work. I only know Pavel. Oh, I am delighted, and we will have a conversation straight away. We are great fans of Siem na Siem, and very happy that you got a prize this year. So perhaps you can explain afterwards whether you see it a bit like this, that there is things merging. You also have the opposite, that you have information platforms becoming a public actor, really. I think Mediazona is a very good example, because they started as a completely niche media, reporting on prisons and trials and conditions in the zona. And now, this year, they are attracting 1 million viewers every week and getting 1 million rubles in donations every single month. They are financing themselves 40 to 50% from private donations and not from foreign funders like us. And in this worsening situation and with the summer protests, they have actually grown into a proper watchdog organization. And watchdog is a classical function of an NGO, of civil society in society. So I think that is a very interesting new trend. Second, outreach. The new infrastructure and the creative use of all this technology has enabled civil society to reach completely new audiences. I was mentioning this singer Yamal in Azerbaijan, Zere in Kyrgyzstan. But if you look at Russia, we have Alexander Gorbunov, sitting in a wheelchair as an individual, posting his tweets and filling his Telegram channels. He's reaching millions these days as an individual. You have Yuri Dud with almost 3 million subscribers on YouTube. And as I read, Navalny Live and Dosh together reached more than 6.5 million people this summer. And as Leonid Volkov very proudly stated, this was more than Vladimir Putin during his last big yearly press conference. But also, Всё сложно, the film I talked to you about on HIV, it had almost 1 million, 900,000 viewers in just the first year. This Gebnia game I told you about is 70,000 people using it. To me, this is new newsmaking, and it's new influencers in the information space out there, and they are changing the information space. And it's certainly not the old NGOs that had little rooms in a backyard somewhere where individual citizens would go to have consultations and advice and support and help. So new outreach, but also new connectivity. Perhaps that is the most important, because this new activism is beginning to connect in a serious way with society. That is something we didn't have in the 1990s, and that perhaps we all didn't understand was a big vacuum at the time. Many organizations, individuals, and groups are today filling a vacuum that is created by this crisis of confidence that we talked about yesterday between the state and society. There was this big survey by the group around Mikhail Dmitriev that already a year ago found out that 91% of Russians don't expect the state to solve any of their problems. And I think that shows the Crimea's consensus we know is dead, but the whole social contract, even understanding between state and society, no longer exists. And we all follow all the research on the use of media. I mean, the trust in official state media is sinking even in the old generation. But the young generation almost hardly watches television anymore. I think it's 15 to 20%. The use is the information today goes via mobile phones. And in this alternative universe of information that is being built. So what the research also shows, and this is not just Mikhail Dmitriev, it's also other research, that people, when they are asked whether they feel a personal responsibility for what is happening in their own country, are more and more saying, yes, I do, and it's not just others and the state who is having to sort out. Because the state is not supplying solutions, people are becoming more aware that their individual input is needed and is meaningful. So all these trends, I think, provide a historical chance and opportunity for civil societies to step in, and we are encouraging every single group we work with to be aware of this chance and to really be able and to develop ways to connect with people who have real needs and real issues to solve. The last thing is new trend is sustainability. Because all this pressure on foreign funding, which really made civil society in Russia in the 1990s, and we all know how dependent the sector was on it, but with law on foreign agents and, of course, this whole list of undesired organizations, there is less and less financial support from abroad, and it has forced organizations to become much more self-reliant. And many of them, as we are watching, are becoming very inventive about new ways to generate their own funding. We are supporting this a lot, new business models, from running cafes to hiring out their space, their equipment, as some news media are doing, and to develop membership schemes and of course crowdfunding tools of any kind, and even a mixture of profit and non-profit models. At the same time, the sad side of it is that the West has also become much weaker in promoting human rights. And it has also forced civic activism to look beyond the West as a role model. What we are seeing is that the younger generation of you isn't even referring so much anymore to international conventions, agreements and protocols, but they work to address again the real issues. They are the same. It is all about justice and human rights and protection against violence, but it's no longer framed in this international language of human rights and conventions. So both these trends, the shift away from Western funding, but also from the international framework, I think are a radical change in the sector as such. It is to me clear that it has a double benefit really, because it boosts the independence and the long-term sustainability to work with funding from your own community, from people that actually support you and know what you stand for and feel loyal to you. And it also creates a new legitimacy, because Putin can't say you have been paid by Western money and dollars from abroad to do what you are doing. No, you're supported by your own society to do what you are doing. Your mission is your society's mission. Your vision is the vision that is shared by many in your country. So I think, having watched Putin trying to drive a real wedge between civil society, calling them foreign agents, and wider, larger Russian society, now the opposite is happening. There's a wedge between the Kremlin and society, and civil society can really step in and is building a new connection, new loyalty, and new community, which we did not have in the 1990s. And this is giving me a lot of hope. So I don't know how, can I go on a little bit more? Yes, because I remember, as I mentioned, the Bolotnaya days, that at the time people, your generation at the time, told me that, I remember this phrase, pasta vyshla iz tuby. You know, it cannot go back. People were so full of enthusiasm at the time, but we lost so much afterwards that we probably, many of us thought, God, of course the pasta can go back in the, we don't know how, but somehow it has disappeared. To me, what's happening now shows that it never went back, that it's still out there, and that it's developing in a new way. I think even many of the structures that I mentioned, Ovide Info, first of them, were developed because of everything that happened in the Bolotnaya days. And the imagination of creating all these tools to coordinate protests better. This imagination was born out of the shock of the clampdown after the Bolotnaya protests. So this is not said that we are over the mountain, as we say in German, yet, that the pasta is going to stay there forever. I see many challenges, and I don't want to be seen as over-optimistic. I just see many positive trends, but I also see many very important challenges ahead, and it will be your generation that will have to handle them. I mentioned a new sustainability, but to keep this going, it's going to be very difficult because activism is spreading, becoming more horizontal, more fluid, but it is also becoming more short-lived. Situativny was the word yesterday, yes, and more fragmented. Many protests have lost their momentum. Grassroots organizations do remain local and isolated. Informal groups come and go as phenomena that disappear again. And to preserve a real sustainability, every group and the whole sector will really have to enter into a new dynamic of multitasking, I think. It will have to scale up impact, advance the community building, invest even more in new technologies, and combine resilience with innovation. And build more and more business models, funding models, monetization, really financial base, building financial base, combining old and new organizations. To me, there's still too little interaction between the traditional NGO sector and these new informal groups, and there is a danger of political groups becoming separated by legislation and by pressure from those working for the good, social problems, and the solidarity has to be preserved of civil society to work together. First challenge. Second, of course, is digital suppression. I mean, autocrats will not give up in this cat and mouse game of who controls the internet. Civic groups, so far, with all the tools that I have described, are completely dependent on access to the internet. And while China is really showing how far this goes, Russia is pushing to become a leader in the post-Soviet space in the suppression of the internet. You have all heard that Roskomnadzor is installing the first generation of technical equipment at the major telecom networks to see whether it can test this close down of the internet. They call it the combat mode, which is quite a fitting description. We have at all our events people from Roskomsvoboda telling us it's impossible for Russia to go China's way because it got into the game much too late. China built its sovereign internet from the day one, and it's impossible to, when you have already all the international connections, to afterwards close down the internet. So perhaps this will remain impossible, but that more repression and more restrictions are inevitable, and censorship will be with you in an increasing form that is very clear. We see it in Kazakhstan ahead of the presidential elections, and since then internet control and surveillance of individual users has gone up 100%. In Tajikistan, they managed to close all Google servers in May. And Azerbaijan, which is even another latecomer in the game, is joining this whole connection of digital authoritarianism, and there is a little step and a little new law and a little measure every day to close the space in Azerbaijan rigidly. So these tendencies are there. And as I say, it will require an incredible dynamic and an incredible effort to stay in this game that you always have a step ahead when the regime is having a step. To keep running in this game of innovation and control. And the other challenge I would like to mention is artificial intelligence. Because, as I say, the civil society sector has really learned to catch up in use of digital tools and of civic tech, as we call it in our language. But as they are just catching up, there is really a totally new era starting already with machine learning and the creative use of big data. One of our partners is CLOP, a fantastic new information network in Kyrgyzstan, and they do a lot of work on this, and they are very, very worried that the civic sector will be too slow in this accelerating spiral of digital innovation, and that artificial intelligence is a quantum leap, a really big jump into something new that perhaps requires so much investment technologically, knowledge-wise, and organizational-wise, that civil society might not be ready for it. So I think there is never a moment to stop, and the race goes on. But what our friend Rinat from CLOP says is that groups who don't learn to use artificial intelligence might be gone in some years, because their colleagues will use it and their opponents, the governments, will certainly use it. So I'm ending on these question marks. But I would also like to invite you very much to please look at our website, to stay in touch with me, because we are doing so many trainings and fantastically interesting events. We are having Camp now coming up next in Chisinau. Now it was in Tbilisi and in Yerevan last year, where we train and inform and share with all the civic activists of the whole region. We have Unlock in Prague every year, a huge event also to really be at the forefront of innovation, of new thinking and new doing in civil society. And I would love to see as many of you as possible to join us and to be in touch, to take part in our trainings. And also we offer fellowships for 2 to 3 months in Prague to think out a project, to go to a real depth in writing and thinking out something new that you are doing. And we offer internships within Europe, within Central Europe, also here. Also in Germany, also in Hungary, in Poland, or in whatever neighboring country. If you find an organization or an association or a group where you think you can learn exactly what is the best next step for you to learn, then we will support you to not even come to Prague, but you'd go straight to Bishkek or to Budapest or to Berlin to be with an organization that is the ideal partner for you at this moment. And we will support you for 3 months to be with them, embed with them, and learn and work with them, and come back with a new level of inspiration and knowledge. So that's really what I would like to encourage you to do. And sorry again for the English, and thank you for your patience.